want to welcome everybody to our Advocacy Town Hall conversation. We've had a great preservation month with a lot of questions coming in as we've been putting out a lot of information, and we thought it would be great to have a little interaction with the Advocacy Department. And so a couple of quick introductions, if you want to raise your hand and wave. But we have Erin Minigan, our Director of Historic Preservation, and the Anna Catherine Carroll, who is our Manager of Preservation Initiatives, and then Victoria Futrell, who is our Marketing and Communications Coordinator, who is going to graciously stay on the call with us and make sure that the technology works as she lines us up and keeps us pointed in the right direction on all things marketing and communications. But we're really thrilled to be able to sort of work with you all today. As I said, Preservation Month has had to take a little bit of a different course this year. And so we have gone virtual, and a big thanks to our sponsors who stuck with us and really have allowed us to pull together the content that we've shared, and we hope that you've enjoyed that, and it's given you plenty to sort of stay focused, engaged on in Charleston over the past few months. You know, as we all know, this was the 100th anniversary of the Preservation Society. This is not how we anticipated celebrating it, but we're very hopeful to get back in person with our membership in the community very soon. But, you know, Zoom meetings have now become just a part of our daily business. And so, you know, while we can't wait to get back to face-to-face meetings, this has really shown itself to be a great tool for engaging with the membership. And, you know, this is an idea that we're doing today that we hope to be able to periodically repeat as there's a lot going on in the community. It's a great way to reach out and work with our members and participants. So with that, we want to sort of jump into this, and I'll turn it over to Erin and Anna Catherine to get us started.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, during this time when the world has paused, we're using this as an opportunity to make ground on many of our major advocacy issues and have been working really hard to stay in close communication with our membership to keep you all informed. We wanted to end Preservation Month by answering your questions because there's a lot of issues going on right now, and keeping up and engaging in the public process can be daunting, even under normal circumstances.
And that being said, we are thrilled to have received so many great questions from our members over the past month. And as we were working through them, we've done our best to organize them by categories that we will run through in today's presentation. And given the nature of the virtual public meeting format, it is necessary for us to manage input. So if you have questions that come to mind during today's presentation, please feel free to add them to the chat. But we will be prioritizing the questions that we received in advance, but PSC staff will do our best to get to the questions if time permits.
Yeah, and first, just to give you a little bit of background on the work of the Preservation Society, it's very common for people to think we only care about paint colors or window boxes. And while we do weigh in on those applications that go before the Board of Architectural Review, our work is so much bigger than that. We engage in the major projects and plans impacting the future of Charleston to protect our city's distinctive character, quality of life, and diverse communities. We plan to cover many of those issues today and give you a little bit more of insight into our advocacy approach.
Yeah, I think, you know, people think preservation is solely focused on the past, but, you know, I think what the Preservation Society has demonstrated now for 100 years is that our work is really focused on the future. And we do that by ensuring that the character and the livability of Charleston is preserved and not destroyed. You know, we are so fortunate to live in one of the great cities of the world, and that requires a constant vigilance every single day. And that is where the team on this call today, that's where you're going to find them every single day. So we'd love to get into kind of running through some of our day-to-day advocacy.
Yeah, just getting started off with some of the general questions about what we do every day. And the first question we received was a great one. How are virtual meetings going? So we've been keeping a close eye on virtual city council meetings that have been happening during this time over the past couple months. But last night was the first meeting of another city board, specifically the Board of Architectural Review Small. They convened over Zoom to discuss applications for alterations, new construction, and demolition. And it was really interesting. At first, it got off to a bit of a bumpy start. There were some technological issues that was delaying the meeting at some times. Unfortunately, there was one board member who was having internet connectivity issues, and so he got kicked off the meeting at a couple points. But in the end, everything worked out, and I really have to commend staff. They did a really tremendous job of keeping the meeting organized and flowing to the best of their abilities. And I just also wanted to share my experience signing up to speak as a public participant. At first, when I logged on, I was pretty concerned about my ability to speak over Zoom because I didn't see a way for me to chime in and unmute myself. But I will say, have faith that staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak for the item you signed up for. They did that for me, and it worked out just fine. So we will continue to put out information to help you navigate this process and update you when we can expect normal meetings to resume. And here's just a quick screenshot of what that meeting looked like last night.
So in that vein, a question that we receive fairly regularly is, what is the Preservation Society's role in the city process? Do we approve projects? Kind of how do we fit into that equation? And so just to give a bit of a background, the Preservation Society, we've played an active role in Charleston's public process for 100 years. And we were actually instrumental in establishing the public process in Charleston in the 1920s and 30s. In our early years, we helped form the nation's first zoning ordinance established in 1931 that also designated the nation's first historic district to be protected by zoning. And so our involvement really only increased from there. And while the city's elected officials, boards, commissions, they really are the decision makers today, the PSC is present at nearly every public meeting, and we consistently advocate for best outcomes for Charleston with regard to livability, character and resilience. So in addition to that, one of the most significant parts of our contribution to the public process is our interaction with project team members behind the scenes. And this leads us into another really great question from one of our members.
Yeah, and I would just add, it's engaging with the project teams, but our model and approach has always been engaging with you, our members, and the larger community. When we started down this path a few years ago, or when I did, the question I would always get is, how did y'all let that happen? And there is a public process that we have, and that is what we focus on. And so one of our core jobs is to make sure that you are informed and engaged before decisions get made. But when we're working with the builders, it's a little bit of a different process in working with our members. And the development, community in Charleston's changed greatly. Historically, you had what we call country club developers. It's a lot of local developers that are finding their investors and capital locally. And that's always been a sort of self-controlling mechanism in a way, because people that live here are part of this community and they want to be a part of projects that really add to the community for the most part. So it really was a quality control that was built in for a very long time. That's changed in the last decade and a half. There's so much capital and outside money that's really here for one reason, to make money. And Charleston being such a hot development market, there's a lot of people that are new to town that see our historical approach and our process as really a hindrance to what they're doing. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is bring value to the project. There are so many projects going on. The rate of growth is just unbelievable. But it doesn't matter whether it's a developer that's from Charleston or a developer that's new to Charleston. For us, the key to success is engaging early on in that conversation. By the time applications hit an agenda, we have to be reactive. And so the community is forced to chase it. And some developers do this deliberately. They don't want to show their cards. They don't want to have that conversation, which presents its own challenge. But, majority of developers, I think, we have an ongoing working relationship. And even if we have concerns and opposition on one project, we recognize that we're going to have to work with them tomorrow on the next project. So a lot of our developers now really actively seek out our input early on. And that, for us, is a key component for success. So for us, our general approach to advocacy is that we want to bring value to the process. And that includes all of the stakeholders, our membership, the residents, the neighborhoods, but also the developers, because again, we want them to come to us early on. And so for me, the key to advocacy is bring value to the process. But when you have bad actors that just choose to behave badly, which we do, and I'm not showing any of these renderings to instigate that these projects are bad actors. These are actually projects that we've worked very, very closely on for a long period of time with the project teams. But, you know, there are bad actors, and we need the tools to be able to prevent their bad ideas from being able to go forward. And that's why the community education and engagement is so important. But I think for the society, probably our single defining characteristic is that we have a 100-year standard by which we hold all projects and processes to. And, you know, we always have to look back to Susan Pringle Frost as really putting this movement and this idea in motion. And, you know, we have a governance model that really sets us up to be able to maintain that. As a membership organization, our membership is really what keeps us grounded and keeps us focused, keeps us informed. And, you know, we have a 100-year track record of holding the line and never being afraid to take the hard position. And I think that is what allows the Preservation Society to bring its unique voice to the process.
So to wrap up this initial section about our day-to-day advocacy, this is a good question. Do we only focus on the peninsula? And this is important to us, but the answer is no. We are actively working on issues citywide, both on and off the peninsula, because the current issues that Charleston is facing really don't know district boundaries, from flooding to overdevelopment to tourism management. These are citywide, if not regional issues. And so as our focus has transitioned from kind of a building by building approach to a larger scale, our approach and our advocacy has expanded with that. So just a few examples of how we work to make an impact citywide. Engaging in the public process is huge for us, from city council to design review board to board of zoning appeals, charrettes and workshops. All of these meetings consist of agenda items that impact all parts of the city. Another area is community engagement efforts. You know, by going out into neighborhoods, both on and off the peninsula, we can really work to better understand the issues that matter to residents and how we can best support them. And then lastly, as many of you know, the scope of our preservation initiatives really do span the entirety of the Lowcountry, from our Carolopolis Award winners to historic markers to efforts to really intervene and save or stabilize individual sites and structures. We're all over the Lowcountry, and this is a really great example right here of an area where our advocacy efforts are currently focused on Jahassee Island and the Ace Basin. So more to come on that, but we really appreciate that question. And so now we'll transition into a little bit more of an issue-specific approach to some of our questions that we received.
Yeah, and as we're talking about looking citywide, we have one major city project that is focused on the peninsula. And we're getting a tremendous amount of questions. There have been some, I think, really good informational sessions thus far, hosted by Historic Charleston Foundation and the city council had a great workshop. And you know, one of the big questions that we're getting of the many is, what is the wall going to look like? How does it impact our experience downtown? You know, will the breezes be blocked? You know, how is this going to be engineered to work? And so let's take a really, really quick high-level run-through update of the project. And again, this is probably pretty well known to most of you, but if not, the Army Corps website is a tremendous resource for information. But you know, what we're talking about is a wall around the city that's projected to be at 12 feet. And this is really designed to do one thing, and that is to prevent storm surge. The notion of a hurricane hitting directly in Charleston, sending a wall of water, we know would have a massive impact and would obviously be incredibly detrimental to the historic district and a lot of historic residents, not to mention the commercial district's livability and just the overall resiliency of the city. And so here you can see the wall as it runs around, kind of where it's generally located, and it's a fat line because they don't know exactly whether it's going to be on this parcel or that parcel. And what we keep being told is that comes in the future. And I think that's one of our core challenges, is we have to sort of work through this conceptually without knowing the details, and the details are going to be incredibly important. So 12-foot wall, 5 pumps, if you go back to the last slide, and then a wave attenuation structure you can see on the bottom right, which would be roughly about 200 feet off of South and East Batteries. And again, that would be sort of a wave break is what that is. And then moving forward, You know, one of the most important slides that we would draw the community's attention to is this, and this is on the website and in the plan. But this shows the actual sort of perceived height of the wall, because as the elevation changes, the wall doesn't go up and down with the elevation. It is 12 feet all the way across. So in areas like the Batteries, you are going to experience a 12-foot structure. As you move up the west side, and so we can see green is low, and as it gets hotter, that means it's getting higher as you move into the red. So along the west side, you're going to have a fairly substantial, you know, sort of 10 to 12-foot wall. On the east side, where the natural topography is a bit higher, it will also fluctuate greatly, but generally be lower in perceived actuality than the west side. But we know that high Battery currently is at 9 feet. That will go to 12 feet. Low Battery, which is currently being redone, is also not up to 12 feet. So the open rail design that the city's worked on with the community over the last few years would likely be filled in with solid panels. And the remaining of the structure, we don't really know, but we know it's either I walls or T walls. And these are examples from New Orleans and other locations that show, also these are at varying heights, but show what some of these walls look like with a multi-use path on the top of it, which is part of the consideration. Still unclear on how much of the wall will be able to be activated in this fashion. And I think one of the key problems that I'll end on is that there are no visuals. This is the best that we can do. And so as people are trying to come to grips with understanding this, you know, it's really important, we think, for the Army Corps and the city to help the community understand actually what this is going to look like. And it's hard to make such a monumental decision without information. So, you know, we remain concerned about a 12-foot wall. We think it's going to greatly alter, we know it's going to greatly alter the experience of the city. And we need to understand that better. And we need to understand the science behind it. We need to understand the projections going forward. And we are actively working with our community partners in the city and the Army Corps of Engineers to really push. And this will be a long process, but we have a time frame now where we desperately need the community to be weighing in and stating their concerns directly to the Army Corps of Engineers.
Absolutely. Another question we received, which is excellent and very relevant to this process, is will an environmental impact statement be required? It is the Army Corps' stance that an environmental impact statement is not necessary, and only an environmental analysis would be sufficient, which requires a lower level of investigation than an environmental impact statement. Clearly, based on the study, the wall will interact with and in some cases cut through existing water systems around the peninsula, as you can see here. And this would be the biggest infrastructure project in the history of Charleston, and not going through with a full environmental review is something we really struggle with as an organization. So we are advocating for the undertaking of a true environmental impact statement, since this is such a complex and high impact project that will significantly affect Charleston's waterways, marshes, and creeks.
Another question on a lot of people's minds is, what is the cost of maintaining the wall, and where will that money come from? So according to the Army Corps and the city, the wall itself will include somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 floodgates that will have to be opened and closed in order for the wall to function. And that being said, it's roughly estimated that $5 to $6 million will be required annually just to operate the wall, which we feel is fairly optimistic. And with billions of dollars of flood mitigation projects already in the pipeline citywide, you know, we're really pushing for more information here to understand how the Army Corps' plan will factor into and impact these projects, and also how the recommendations of the Dutch dialogues are taken into consideration here. So this will be a critically important part of City Council's conversation as they decide how to allocate funds for this project in the future.
Yeah, I was just pointing out that, go ahead, Chris.
No, after you.
I was just going to explain this photo a little bit. This is an example of a floodgate, I believe in New Orleans, that may be, you know, typical of the types of gates part of this project, and the operation of these gates is what would be part of that major cost to operate them every single year. And that's,
yeah. As roads pass through the wall, you'll have to have these gates that when an event is coming, they'll be able to close the system down and sort of prepare for what will come. So how these will be integrated will be a critical part of that conversation as well. And then the question is, will this solve flooding downtown? And Anna Catherine touched on a key point. We have, I think as a community, invested a lot of time, energy, focus, and interest in the Dutch dialogues, which have really promoted a really holistic approach to managing water. It's not just storm surge or flooding, it's managing water. And they acknowledge that, a defensive component to the peninsula is an important part of that. It's one part of a much larger approach. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers is focused on one component and one component only, and that is to prevent storm surge. That is really the only consideration that is driving the design of this proposal. It is simply not designed to solve flooding. And when we talk about flooding, we talk about sunny day flooding. We talk about the type of raining floods. I live in Wagner Terrace, and we have been underwater 3 times in the last 3 weeks, massively underwater. It will not help in those situations. The wall does have some unintended beneficial help. As tides rise over 8 feet, the wall would be closed, so it would take out the sort of top 10% of the typical flooding events. But scenes like you can see in this photograph here, many of which, when we consider Lockwood and East Bay, the hospital district, these areas that have chronic sunny day flooding, will not necessarily be substantially improved as a result of that. So again, it's important to know this is to prevent a wave, which, to not minimize, that would be the most destructive flooding component that we would experience as a community. But again, the question is we have a lot of flooding problems, from inundation to storm surge. And so how does this work within that larger picture? And we're pleased to be working with a lot of our community partners and hosting a community webinar next week with the city and the Army Corps of Engineers. It's really a continuation of the conversations that have been had thus far. That's going to be next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. We'll have emails, as will our partner organizations, going out very shortly. But this, we hope that the city and the Army Corps will be able to take the conversation one step farther and start to talk about where the money comes from, where the money doesn't come from, what this impact will be on other critical infrastructure projects, both flood related and non-flood related. And so we really need to understand that. We really need to understand how this fits into the city's overall approach to flooding and stormwater citywide. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to learn a little bit more. But I think this is what's critical for the community to continue to ask for moving forward. And to that end, we have until June 19th to submit comments to the Army Corps of Engineers. And so we really encourage you to be engaged and put your comments in. You can go to the Army Corps of Engineers website, ton of information there. All you have to do is Google Charleston Peninsula Flood Study, and that will get you where you need to go.
Yeah. Now moving into another category, which we received a lot of interest in, and that is new major construction happening in Charleston. First, how did all of those huge buildings on Upper Meeting Street get approved? This is a great question and one we get quite often. So when the city's height districts were revised in 2015, the Upper Meeting and King Street corridors were designated as areas that could handle more height than our sensitive residential historic areas. So thus, the tallest buildings on the peninsula are concentrated in this area. An additional floor may also be granted for architectural merit, allowing some buildings to rise up to 9 stories, and that is determined by the Board of Architectural Review. So with up to 9 stories of height allowed by zoning, the Preservation Society advocates for not only the highest quality materials and design, but massing that responds to the streetscape and contributes positively to the pedestrian experience. But getting back to the core question of how did this all happen, there is a public process in place to vet these proposals. And though it's frustrating when bad projects move forward, appropriate community engagement can result in an effective process. And this is illustrated by the next question, which features an example of one of those good projects that was shaped by community engagement.
And again, the Morris Sokol project that was approved earlier this year is a big project. but I think it's an example of how one can go about doing a large-scale project downtown and do it the right way. This project's been in the design development for 4 or 5 years. They are proposing an incredible mix of use from for sale residential, which we believe we need a lot more of in Charleston. We're building a lot of apartments, but we think condominiums and we think home ownership is critically important. We think having affordable units, mid-rise, full spectrum housing is critically important. So they're bringing a product type that we don't have much of. They're also bringing a highly amenitized retail and office component with an accommodations use. And we think this mix of use will really be beneficial to Upper King Street, because let's be honest, it's become a bit of a bar destination. It's really a night scene. And so our hope is this can bring some really positive activation that will ultimately help the long-term resiliency and sustainability for Upper King Street and improve it as a place for residents to go. But as I said, this has been going on for over 4 years. They've had lots of community charrettes. We've had too many meetings to count as the project has evolved over that time. It's been an incredibly transparent project and process, and they've continued to keep everybody engaged in the creation of this. And that obviously makes it different from a lot of other projects. And we continue to work closely with the project team. We reviewed this conceptually at the BAR Large in February, and we actually spoke in support. They stepped the big buildings way back from King Street, really respecting the character, height, and scale, and they did not have to do that. And so again, it's an example of trying to really respect the context. And many of the projects that you see when you're driving around don't necessarily do that. But I think it's also critical that when we look at this from, a big building doesn't have to be a bad building, but a big building that has poor materials and poor design is really the worst case scenario. And so this project really proposes some of the highest quality design and materials. We're talking, brick and steel and marble with detailing that we think is really up to the standard of historic Charleston. And so we really think that this is going to be positive. Unfortunately, a lot of the other projects come through, they feel more like entitlement exercises than actual designs that are intended to do a great project. And so when we see things like the former Charleston School of Law trying to become a hotel, this is the quality of design that we see on those types of projects. We have projects that are really just aimed at getting as many apartments on a piece of property as is possible, and others like the Hughes Lumber, where the photograph, I think, speaks 1,000 words. And this is a project that we fought that ultimately received an additional floor for architectural merit. And we think that is just a failure of the process. We do not believe this is architectural merit. We do not believe that this is going to be positive for Charleston. So that's why it's so important that we have a vision, that we have a plan as to where we want to go as a community, so that we can start to hold all of these projects to an even standard. I think that's a good segue into the comprehensive plan.
Great. So we received a great question from one of our members, which is, how is the comprehensive plan different from other plans? And we're so close to these issues, it's important for us to reflect on this as well. And the importance of the comprehensive plan really can't be overstated. Virtually every zoning and infrastructure decision made in the city, and specifically any decision made by the Planning Commission, is guided by the tenets laid out in the city's comprehensive plan. Last updated in 2010, the comprehensive plan establishes a vision for the city over a 10-year period. So that means that right now we are in a period where it's time to plan for Charleston's next decade. And by state law, this year's comprehensive plan update must be completed by February of 2021, leaving us on a very tight timeline at this point for community engagement, which touches on another question that we received, which is when will the public be able to learn about and engage with the comp plan update process?
If I could just add quickly before we jump into that, a typical comprehensive plan, we've been reaching out to a lot of communities around the country. A typical process by which a comp plan will be created is a 2 to 3 year process. And we have been condensed down into a 1 year process that now has been greatly disrupted because the public engagement was supposed to start months ago, as you can see from this slide. So I just want to reiterate that this is a really important area of need that the community needs to remain focused on.
Right. So as Chris indicated, under normal circumstances, we would be in the midst of a robust public engagement process. But given present challenges, city staff has indicated that, we'll be aiming for a late summer, potentially early fall start. We understand that your first opportunity to make your voice heard will be through an online survey that should be available soon. So we will keep you updated on that front. And we know that our city staff is hard at work on this, and we have full faith in their ability to carry this update through effectively, but we are concerned about the feasibility of completing this update on such a tight timeline, and we're hopeful that flexibility can be brought forward to incorporate an extension if need be as we move further into this process later this year.
And, one of the things that we've done is we've really tried to work very closely with the Coastal Conservation League and Historic Charleston Foundation because it's so critical that we are all speaking in one voice on this. And we've had some productive dialogue with the city and we actively reached out to them, and we are going to try to help them and support them in the public engagement process. But if we can, let's talk about some of our quick priorities. And to Anna Catherine's point, we will keep you updated on this. But as we go through a plan, I think what people don't need to understand is the comp plan really determines what the vision for the next 10 years is for this community. And by vision, that means what our land use decisions are, what our infrastructure decisions, and what our overall policy decisions. And these are what filter down to all of the boards. Every decision the Planning Commission makes is predicated on the recommendation of the comprehensive plan. So in our world, this is something that impacts every decision that's made. And so for us, this is incredibly important. So our priority areas organizationally, the society's focused on addressing overdevelopment, over-tourism, and flooding. These are our core areas. The mechanisms by which we do that, we could jump back to the last one, please. Okay. The mechanisms by we do that is zoning, right? Zoning lays out the law of the land, and the public process needs to support that. And we think that there are significant improvements. Our zoning ordinance is decades, and it's 30, 40 years old. It's time to redo it. That is a massive undertaking. But our public processes can also be made more robust, and community engagement can be greatly improved. And then furthermore, for some of our areas of we think dire need right now as a community, is we have to figure out ways that we can start to alleviate the affordability crisis that's going on. The city has changed so quickly. The cost of housing has risen so drastically. And so this is an area where we really, really need to drill down. And then a diversity of use. This is a city. This is a living city. And so we need to have really vibrant commercial corridors as well as strong neighborhoods. And so we really want to study use because, the approach to city building today is very different than it was 20 and 30 years ago when these plans were really put together. And we also feel like there's a lot of opportunity to bring the incentives of historic preservation to neighborhoods that currently have BAR oversight but are not eligible for tax credits and easements and things that can actually help alleviate some of the costs of home ownership for historic properties. And so we think that is critically important. But we really feel like, we've got to advocate for a sustainable growth for the city, improved development practices. And I think, the city's changed so much. And when we start to think about things like Laurel Island, for example, we need to start thinking how these change our approach. Slides here, obviously, that show a lot of the core issues. And so we just need this document to better support the community in the areas that we've talked about. Laurel Island is another question that's come up a lot. And again, our current comp plan does not even consider the redevelopment of this. So we get a lot of questions on this right now, and so I'm happy to turn it over.
Right. Yeah, we received a lot of questions. This is certainly one of the biggest looming developments coming up for Charleston. So first, what is the status of the Laurel Island project? Just to give some context, Laurel Island is located just north of downtown along the Cooper River. It's an old landfill that is no longer active and stands close to about 200 acres. And this vacant site represents an unprecedented opportunity for development on the peninsula. This proposal is just the latest in a series of proposals that have come forth for redevelopment. First, it was planned to be a luxury golf course community. Then another group came along with a proposal that was heavily focused on retail. And in both cases, extensive charrettes were done with the community to develop a vision for that redevelopment. Now we're seeing a third proposal, but surprisingly, there has been no community engagement to date. We actually caught this on a December Planning Commission agenda after it had been published. And like us, many in the community were surprised to see such a major development just pop up requesting approval. So due to pushback, the developer agreed to have the hearing be informational only with no decision being made. But then the pandemic was upon us and the item was not heard. So we do expect it to be coming back very soon on an upcoming Planning Commission agenda.
So just to provide a quick overview of what we typically see in Charleston with proposed planned unit developments, PUDs, as they're called even in their early phases of review, are intended to really establish a vision. And here on the screen, we have the proposed Magnolia PUD from a few years ago, which is a pretty comparable example to the Laurel Island project. And as can be seen here, this PUD provides not only a specific land use plan, but a defined street grid, building footprints, a plan for active and open green space. And then moving to the next slide, we even have here, an urban design concept that provides clarity on what this development aspires to be and how it engages with the character and infrastructure of the city, which is really important in the early phases of these processes. So that being said, what we have seen thus far with Laurel Island has been a bit different.
Let me unmute myself. So, as we say, most of the plans that come forward for projects of this scale, and to put this in perspective, we think of typically more suburban projects. Daniel Island's a good bit larger, but it's a great example of what we call a master plan community. And so typically we have this master plan that comes forward, this vision, and then the PUD, which is, as we now know, the sort of the zoning framework for it that comes forward. And so what we're seeing with Laurel Island is we don't have that master plan, we don't have that vision, but yet at the same time, the PUD is asking for an incredible amount of entitlement. And by entitlement, I mean ability to build lots and lots and lots. And so, one of the things that we look at with the little information provided is the street grid. And one of our questions was why does it deviate, right? If our city's like this and this goes off at this funny angle, why do we make the street grid that way? And we were told that, well, that's not a real street grid. It's really for illustrative purposes. There is no street grid. It will be determined by the buildings. That's the opposite of how you build cities. You create a vision, you put in a framework that's almost the DNA, if you will, of what that area wants to be. And then as the market allows it, you want to build in flexibility, but you want to allow the market to then fill in and support that vision. And so, that's one of the things that we're really struggling with. Also the connectivity. They have Brigade and Romney streets, and then they've also proposed a significant bridge that would be on Coolblow Street that rises up over Morrison Drive, New Market Creek, the railway, and then lands on the island. And one of our concerns, we just submitted a letter on that, but one of our concerns is that that's a lot of traffic. And so, this plan anticipates 2.2 million square feet of office and 4,260, I think roughly, residential units. And if you take an average size of a residential unit, we're talking about potentially a 10 million square foot development. And furthermore, the PUD is so vague, it could be hundreds of buildings. But guess what? It could also be one building. You could build the Mall of America out here, and it would be fully allowed within as proposed. So, flexibility, we understand this is an incredibly challenging site, and the development team has done, I think, a notable job of really weaving together a massively challenging project. But now it's time for the community to be engaged and talk about what this can be going forward. They say they want it to be an organic development. We need to put a vision in place. We need to be building towards something. We need to ensure that there's better affordable housing, that there is a full range of it. We need to understand the open space. We need to understand how the cultural resources are being impacted. Their cultural resource assessment says they will be impacted. We need to understand that better. But this is a huge opportunity, not only for the developer, but for the community. And so when we talk about a great public realm and open space and connectivity to the existing city, that is what will determine the success. And so we're concerned that this is actually moving forward. We caught this on an agenda for December's Planning Commission. Unfortunately, it was deferred as the city and the applicant are working on this. But our hope is that the city would really take a much stronger position and require the type of vision and plan that we've come to expect on all projects of this scale. Jumping down, another question we get a lot of is what is our vision for cruise? Cruise has been one of the incredible areas of focus during the pandemic, and it's really, I think, highlighted the far-reaching impacts of this industry on our city and region, not just downtown. And we think this is really the right time for the community to take a step back and assess the role that we want cruise to play in Charleston's future. The number of passengers embarking and debarking in Charleston has grown by 460% roughly over the past decade. And that's compounded by explosive growth in tourism. We've gone from 3.2 million to nearly 8 million visitors at that same time period. And so, this is changing the face and character of our city. And so the world is just a different place than it was when this industry started here. And as you know, we didn't like it then, and I can't say it's we're liking it anymore. And I think what we're seeing is that the initial concerns that the community had are really being borne out now. And so our goals are really that we want any cruise operation that's happening in the city to be compatible with Charleston. Charleston is a small-scaled city. Charleston is a residential city. There is no other port facility that has the volume of traffic and size of boats that is within hundreds of feet of residential neighborhoods like we experience in Charleston. And so we feel like this has got to continue to be primary talking point. And obviously this is a multi-million-dollar industry that is unregulated and untaxed. And so if they come to us tomorrow and say, we would like to have 1,000 ships a year, there's nothing as a community that we can do about that. So we think it's critical that local authorities, that the city, that the community, through our elected leadership, have a voice in the decisions that impact their neighborhoods. And so legally enforceable limits, we think, are incredibly important. We have a great coalition with the Conservation League, Historic Charleston Foundation, multiple historic neighborhoods downtown, the Surf Riders Foundation, C4. There is a lot of community interest about this, and we've seen that interest just quadruple over the last few months as cruise and some of their bad behaviors have been really front and center during the pandemic.
So really at the center of all of this is Union Pier. And so good question, what's the status of Union Pier at the moment? And as many know, Union Pier is comprised of more than 70 acres of waterfront on the Cooper River, where cruise ships currently dock in Charleston. And while the property is currently under the ownership of the State Ports Authority in its entirety, it was announced earlier this year that the south end of the site would be sold for redevelopment as the State Ports Authority continues to pursue construction of a new terminal at the north end of Union Pier, an issue that most, though, the PSC and our partners have been involved with for more than a decade. And there have been several visioning efforts for the redevelopment of this site over the past 25 years. We've got an earlier one here and a couple more that we'll go through, but with the potential to be one of the most impactful waterfront projects on the entire East Coast, the Preservation Society sees this as a tremendous opportunity to redevelop this site with long-term community benefit in mind via resilient design solutions, high quality design, a diverse mix of uses, and great connectivity to the waterfront. So this is something you'll hear more from us about in the future. And I don't know if you had anything to add on that, Chris, but if not, we can move into one last issue discussion.
I would just add that we think that this is arguably the most important project that could be coming forward in the near future. We're pleased to be working with Low Enterprises, who are undertaking the community process and the entitlement process that is yet to begin, but we're very encouraged that we can try to really work together for something that is not only a great development, but really an enhancement to Charleston, and community engagement is going to be just absolutely critical on this.
All right, one of our last major topics is demolition by neglect, which Anna Catherine and I field questions on almost every day. It's a major issue for us. So someone asked, is there any effort underway to revise or supplement the current ordinance to render it more enforceable and effective, and what is the Preservation Society's view? So first, just to explain what this is, demolition by neglect is the chronic deterioration of a building due to the lack of maintenance that leads to the structure failing over time and ultimately demolition by default. It's a very tricky issue. Murky ownership and inability to track down the owner of a building contributes to the difficulty to address it, as well as the limited city regulations and enforcement staff that are available to us. Typically, these properties fall into two categories. There are the willful owners. Those are the ones who purposely neglect properties to allow it to deteriorate to the point of necessitating demolition to make way for redevelopment and new construction. Then there are those who are non-willful. Those are typically those who lack financial resources to maintain a property, but may very much want to retain and restore the building. And in terms of enforcement, livability court is our only defense at current time. Possible penalties through the livability court process are fairly weak. The maximum fine is only around $1,000, and in order to continue fining a negligent property owner, it requires someone to physically serve a summons back to livability court, and city staff just doesn't have the capacity to continue doing that. But there is hope. Since 2011, the city has facilitated a demolition by neglect task force, which the Preservation Society serves on. And the primary purpose is for this group to develop new regulatory measures to address demolition by neglect, namely by defining stronger, more effective penalties for willful owners and creating incentives for rehabilitation for those non-willful owners. So one idea that has come up is to create a fund to assist rehabilitation projects, which would come from fines of those who willfully neglect buildings. Also, the idea has come up in terms of regulations to prevent someone from redeveloping a property for a certain number of years if they've allowed a building to deteriorate to the point of necessitating demolition. So in the meantime, until these regulations come to fruition, the Preservation Society strives to serve as a resource to help owners struggling to maintain or restore their properties by connecting them to the right people and resources for a successful project. And just to demonstrate, that buildings that may appear beyond being salvageable, and just to show what's possible, here are a few Carolopolis Award winners from the past few years. This is 29 Kennedy Street on the east side, 50 South Street, and one of our most recent winners from this past year, the Jackson Street Cottages.
Yeah, demolition by neglect has been a 100-year-long issue for us, if not longer, as Miss Sue was running around in the aughts and the teens, doing it in her own individual way. But it's unfortunately one that, there is no silver bullet for it. And so it just requires vigilance and trying to support the homeowners that really need help and preventing the bad actors from getting away with it. So appreciate everyone coming on and joining us for this call. And one of the things is we have to sort of acknowledge the reality of the world we're in. It's very different than where we were a few months ago. And so one of the questions we've got as a result of the pandemic, how is Charleston going to change? And I think if I had a crystal ball and could answer that question, I might be in a different position. But, I think when we look at it, we work in the minutia of city building and management every single day. And so, from our lens, what do we see? Well, we see that this market is going to change. We see that the office market is going to be impacted. We see that tourism is currently being crushed right now but we're going to see probably a resurgence, and we saw it last weekend, and the next few weeks will be very telling. And while we sort of understand and feel the hurt for those that work in tourism-related businesses, particularly in the restaurant and the hospitality industries, you know, tourism is going to come back, and the question is it going to be as it was before, or is it going to be different? We know there's going to be more of a drive-up market than a fly-in market, and so for us, as we're thinking about it, you know, as we think that residential might actually have even be accelerated, as we're already seeing a tremendous amount of interest from people that live in much more dense urban areas that maybe had been considering a move here, saying now's the time. And so we're seeing a real uptick in interest residentially. But as I said, retail, office, you know, accommodations, these are going to be uses that are going to change. And I think a slowdown in accommodations is something that we think is a tremendous opportunity. This is just a slide showing the Airbnbs and the short-term rentals around town. And those are already coming back with a fury. But, you know, we've lost a significant percentage of our housing stock to short-term rentals. The new ordinance is working, but it's a slow process. And so, again, we've got to start to anticipate market shifts and disruptive technologies like Airbnbs. So for us, you know, we really think now is the time to take a step back and think about what is a more sustainable approach to Charleston going forward. You know, if we lose a significant percentage of our retail, which we fear we might on King Street, you know, it's an opportunity for us as a community to say, what do we want King Street to be going forward? Do we want nothing but national brands? Obviously, the landlords are going to be in a tough position and are going to be a key part of how this works moving forward. But there's opportunity for us to really reframe how do we want to handle tourism? How do we want to better balance the growth in the tourism and just the commercial districts moving forward? And then the question that we've gotten, how is preservation going to change? And to answer that, I'd rather talk about how preservation has changed. You know, we have really evolved our model over the last 5 years, really working up to our centennial. You know, as the growth and in development and tourism and flooding has just exploded, you know, we've really pivoted from, you know, really focusing on individual projects and really focusing on larger issues. And that's what we talk about. Where are we focused? Well, we're focused where the issues are. Charleston's not 18 square miles anymore. You know, this district goes from Johns Island to Cainhoy, and that's where our work is. You know, having great development and redevelopment in West Ashley and Johns Island is critically important to downtown. We have to make sure that the entire city develops in a way that supports the prosperity of the entire city and that allows businesses to prosper and residents to have a high quality of life. So I think for us, we are looking at how do we plan, it's more important than ever, how do we start to have that vision moving forward and how do we start that long range planning? So that's where we're looking. And I think, you know, reality is we're always looking to innovate our approach. And I think we've been forced to do that here again. And so for us, you know, I see this as a positive. I see this as another tool in our approach.
Yeah, and speaking of our approach, we've definitely had to pivot, innovate over the past couple months, given the pandemic and working remotely. So we've really revamped our communication strategy and brought a lot more creativity to our work. And this is
thank you, Victoria.
Yes, thank you, Victoria.
Victoria, our stalwarts on communication.
Absolutely. So this is best exemplified by our virtual Preservation Month activities. Seen here is our virtual member meeting that took place earlier this month, which is something we were really looking forward to hosting in person, but I think came up with something really creative and exciting to do digitally. Other than that, we've been coming up with some other fun activities and educational series on our communications, including virtual hard hat tours in lieu of doing those in person. We've been putting together some background on the Preservation Society, our history as an organization, and some advocacy wins that we've experienced over our lifetime. And of course, keeping in very close contact with our membership about those huge advocacy issues that we covered today. We've been pushing out even more emails than normal, just given that everyone's at home and unable to engage physically in the public process. So we've been so pleased to see our communications reaching a wider audience, which underscores that city limits do not define our advocacy. We have to work with the entire community to ensure better decisions are made on growth, livability, tourism, and flooding, from Johns Island to Cainhoy, the range of the low country. And speaking to that, our team is hard at work to revamp our website, and we are very excited to share that with you very soon.
Yeah, and if you've kind of paid attention to our website, it's kind of telegraphed our change in focus. It's really about community engagement and education. And education takes on a lot of forms for us. You know, I think as we talk about reframing tourism, we feel strongly that we don't need to go market Charleston to the rest of the world anymore. I think we should be marketing Charleston to Charleston. I think we need to encourage people that live on Johns Island and Daniel Island to come back downtown and to share in this place that really is the heart and soul of the Low Country. And so that's something that our website hopefully is going to have great educational content, but our community toolkits, our resources for you to engage. You know, we've covered a lot of big issues, and our website is and is now going to be improved. We want it to be the central go-to place if you want to understand what's going on. And the team that you've hopefully got a chance to get a little bit to know today stands ready and willing, and this is what we do every single day. We absolutely love this city, and we wake up every morning to go to work on its behalf, and we couldn't do it without our members, and it is the lifeblood of this organization, and we could not be the community resource or the voice for this community without our members. And so we really want to thank all of you for joining us. We want to thank you for supporting us, and your generosity has enabled us to be able to be in the position that we are as a key watchdog for the future of this city. And so lastly, I just want to thank our incredible sponsors that have been with us through Preservation Month. If you have questions or ideas, and I hope that some have come to you, please don't hesitate to email us at preserve@preservationsociety.org. Pick up the telephone. We have an incredible team that's ready to engage with you and answer your questions and hopefully get your input as well. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us, and happy Preservation Month. Happy 100 years to the Preservation Society, and thank you for joining us.